I'm so sorry. We've just had some technical issues getting started, but my name's Louise, and it's so lovely to be here with you, and sorry to keep you waiting. We're here today to discuss managing psychological safety in the workplace. So let's dive in. I've kept you waiting for long enough. Let's get started. So, perfect. So a little introduction to me. I know we've got a lot of people on the call that are customers and clients of ours at HR Partner. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Louise, and I'm a people and culture professional. So my background is in startups, working in operations, training, as well as HR as a people manager previously. So I essentially come to this with an experience of being in the shoes that you're probably in. So I've sat through many webinars in my time, and I remember sitting through one in 2022 when psychosocial safety first came up. So I understand what it feels like to kind of be at the precipice of it and getting started. So hopefully my experience and guidance will be able to support you today in today's webinar. I am a customer success specialist here at HR Partner. So for those who don't know HR Partner or are new to HR Partner, we are a HR software where we basically help employers to have a one-stop shop for their HR needs. So yeah, that's a little bit of a spiel about me. Just to also let you know, I'm not an employment lawyer, so I can only provide share best practices and guidances today. So if there's anything that you need additional support on, there's definitely resources, but an employment lawyer will be your best bet in those in looking to seek a specific guidance. Alrighty, so let's carry on, move across. We've designed this webinar to basically give you a real understanding, high level, of what psychosocial safety, I've said it a million times and I'll say it wrong every time, but what it is and essentially how you can apply it to your workplace. So we're here to kind of get you started and provide you tools to support you in your journey into psychosocial safety. So let's start with firstly a definition, which is around psychosocial health. So it's more than just an absence of mental illness in a workplace. It's about creating an environment where employees can thrive. So if you can stop and think about a time where you felt like it's been a great time going to work, you feel pumped about the work that you're doing, you're excited to meet with your your colleagues, and do the work. That is what a psychological safety, psychological safe workplace can look like. So where you feel safe, valued, supported, you're managing your work demands well without too much stress, and you engage and perform effectively with your as an individual and with your team as well. So we also know, we might also know what the opposite of this can look like, and that's where we can kind of start to look into psychosocial hazards. So I'm sure that you've all experienced times at work where you have felt stressed, maybe burnt out, felt like there's been an overload, or maybe you've witnessed that in some of your employees. I know that we have a variety of people on the call, from business owners to HR specialists, operations people, into managers. So this does impact everyone within the workplace, and there's no workplace within the world that essentially doesn't have psychosocial hazards that impact their employees. And I think what's important to note is what a psychosocial hazard is, and identifying that is the first key. But knowing that multiple psychosocial hazards can lead to psychological harm within the workplace. So that's why it's important to identify what they are. So let's have a look at this list here. It's a non-exhaustive list. I'm sure that you'll be able to come up with many more psychological hazards within your workplace, but this is just a list to get us started. So what it could look like within a workplace, what hazards: aggression, violence, from not just employees to employees, but potentially from customers to employees, or managers to employees as well, or employees to managers in some instances I've seen before too. There can be bullying, gendered violence. A more common one that has definitely come up in a lot of the reports is around high and low job demands, mainly high job demands. A lack of management support is another one. Low recognition and reward and control. So here's a few examples for you to get you started. But basically, what it is it's things that can cause stress to your employees. And over time, that stress can lead to a psychological injury. So we identify these psychosocial hazards to first go, hey, this is a hazard within our workplace, and then we've got to think about how we can control and reduce that. So previously I've seen this work as in, we look at the individual and say, how can we support this individual? What things can we do to make sure that this individual is thriving? And now that we've got this really clear regulations and guides, we can go, well, actually, it's less about the individual and how the business sets up their systems and structures to support that individual. So looking at these work design, systems of work, management of work, how work is carried out in the workplace, but also personal or work-related interactions, so how employees are interacting with themselves or with clients of yours as well. So it's about how we're designing the workplace and the work and supporting employees with that. And that can start from the very bottom, from how you are creating your job descriptions, and how you're, onboarding your employees, how you're running your training sessions with employees, but it goes through the entire employment life cycle and looks at how we're employing and supporting employees while they're working with us. Now, I will talk to that a little bit more, but first I wanted to talk about what are the changes. So I've seen a lot of legislative talk that, kind of makes my eyes glaze over at times, but I wanted to give you a high level example of what has actually happened out there in that space. So psychological health was always covered, but not always clearly. So under the work health and safety laws, essentially health was covered, but it wasn't a clear definition of what psychological health was. So which meant that there was limited guidance to businesses on how to actually manage psychological risks in practice. So that led to inconsistent application and confusions for employers. What do I actually need to do here? How do I meet obligations? And how do I support my employees to have a thriving workplace? So that triggered a change. So there was a review, and then from that review, reforms were made. And there were national reforms that basically happened because they identified within that review that psychological injuries were increasing and costing businesses and individuals quite a lot. And as I mentioned before, the laws weren't getting much clarity. So within these reforms, essentially what the federal government have done, and now the state and territory governments subsequently afterwards have done, is created codes of practice or guidelines to support employers to meet their obligations underneath these acts. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit as well. There's tools and resources out there to support and guide you, which is wonderful. But what are the kind of key changes that we're looking at? So the key changes are there's an enforceable positive duty. So where we might have previously just kind of waited for a complaint to arise or for an injury to occur, whether it was a physical injury or a psychosocial injury, now we need to have a positive duty to make sure that we're actually identifying what those hazards are, those psychological hazards, whether it's high job demands or, aggressive customers and things like that. And then how we actually eliminate and reduce those risks within the workplace, those hazards within the workplace. So it's not enough to be reactive now. We have to be proactive, and we have to be putting those systems in place to support our employees. Alrighty. The next is a mandatory hierarchy of controls. So basically this looks at essentially what you've got in place to reduce those risks. And previously we'd probably go to, setting up an EAP, an employee assistance program for our employees, and saying, here's a support line you can contact if you need things, and we'll give you some training. But now that's just not enough. We need to do a lot more, and we need to start from not the lowest level of protection, but the highest level of protection, which is eliminating hazards and risks as a first point of contact. So if we can eliminate those hazards, if we can't eliminate those hazards, then we've got to think about, well, what's reasonably practical to put in place to reduce the risk by either altering the management of work, the plant, the systems of work, the work design, or the workplace environment. So that's really looking at it from a strategic point of view. How can we essentially redesign the workplace or put things in place to support employees when these hazards do occur, to reduce that harm? And we'll talk a little bit about the cost of that harm in a bit more detail from an Allianz report, but it is very prevalent in our society, and something that we can now get really clear on through this hierarchy of controls, which is just wonderful to have. The next is we've expanded incident notification. So basically that means that if there are now a broader definition of what needs to be reported through to WorkSafe. So similarly, when you're dealing with a significant physical injury or something that's happened within the workplace that needs to be reported to WorkSafe, they now have a clearer definition of what that looks like from a psychosocial point of view. and the physiological hazards that may be there. So that has broadened. But so what that means is if you're essentially a business and you're needing to report on these things, you can't report on it if you don't have the data. So for business owners like yourselves or managers or HR specialists, you need to start thinking about how are we actually reporting this? How are we reporting near misses? What incident processes do we actually have in place to be documenting this? And it is likely you've already got some of these things in place with dealing with physical injuries. You're not allowing physical injuries to happen within your workplace. You're already reducing its risks. So how can we broaden that out to the psychosocial side of things? Now, so psychological injuries, I should say. So things that, it changes per jurisdiction, but to give you an overall kind of view of what it looks like, and then you can look into your state and territory regulations, because it does vary between Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and so on, is workplace bullying, violence or sexual harassment now needs to be reported, absences of 15 plus days of psychological injury, as well as work-related suicides or attempts as well. So there are those reportable incidents that need to be identified and then obviously shared with WorkSafe. So start with it from your process perspective. What have we got in place to actually document this stuff so then we can actually record it and send it back? And it's likely you're already doing a lot of this stuff. It's just about refining it and retuning it. And the last one is, of course, increased penalties and personal liability. So now that the laws have been put in place, it's basically saying that there are penalties. But there's not just penalties for business owners now. The penalties actually come into effect for individuals. And those individuals, it depends on how serious the incident is. There's 3 different levels. But basically, it refers to a personal liability for an officer. So an officer is a manager or supervisor with, decision-making capabilities. And the idea is that it takes the obligation from just the organisation, but broadens it out to the broader workplace so that you can essentially have a culture of safety ownership, which is what every organisation wants. You don't want to be the person at the top of the organisational chart saying, hey, this is what we've got to do for safety. You want to embed that in your culture and have a safety culture in place. So it's about bringing psychological hazards within that safety culture and recognising that individuals also have a role to play. And that's not just people who are making decisions, it's how employees also show up and do the work as well and making sure that they're safe. So sharing those obligations outwards is a really great way to have a team effort to make sure that we're meeting our legislative requirements. So the next thing I kind of wanted to look at is why we implement these laws and what are the costs. So it's one of the psychological injuries are one of the fastest growing workplace risks in Australia, and claims are rising, the longer recovery times for employees, and it's actually takes a lot longer for at times for an employee to recover from a psychological injury than it does a physical injury. And I'm sure if you've ever dealt with someone who has a physical injury, they can be out for quite a long period of time. So you can imagine what that looks like if that is extended out for a psychological injury. So it's within everyone's best interest to help reduce these hazards, to help reduce psychological injuries in the workplace. And the Allianz Workplace Mental Health Research and Insights, they've got wonderful things on their website if you want to check it out. Basically said that it's rising rapidly, but claims have actually grown by 28 to 30% within the last few years from 2021. So the costs to employers is actually growing in that sense. So longer time off work means more pressure on the broader team, and you know what that can look like within your organisation. But the key drivers, which is really important to kind of note, is that the key drivers were workload pressures. So feeling like there's too much work and not enough time to do it and not enough support for that. Meeting overload, so having too many meetings within a day to not actually be able to get the work done. I'm sure we can all relate to that, where we've seen a crazy back-to-back day of meetings and you just go, oh, how am I going to get any work done today? So that's one of the key trends that came up within their research. Unrealistic deadlines, so really pushing people to have unrealistic deadlines and not having a collaborative approach when discussing deadlines. And then that lack of managerial support. So they're kind of the key factors that were raised within that report. But it's also important to kind of notice that there's people that are disproportionately affected, and that needs to come into your risk management strategy. So, for example, women and younger workers are disproportionately affected in some cases and areas. So whether that comes to harassment or violence, or are younger workers feeling confident in speaking up if there is an issue and feeling confident to have that conversation with their manager. So, I mean, the bottom line is that we kind of want to take what the government have put in place and take that information to help protect workers, employees, reduce claims, reduce costs to the business, and essentially hopefully have better performance within our organisation, better retention, less absenteeism is always great, and then have a better employee value proposition. We can actually attract more talent because you're actually doing it right within your workplace. And these guidelines really help to support and guide you in that. So this slide, hazard to harm, basically looks at, if you've got psychological hazards and they're not controlled, and you've got quite maybe not just one psychological hazard, but a few, it can turn into a negative physiological response. That can look like stress. It can be, an increase in, your breath rate, things like that, which eventually can lead to that psychological harm, or sometimes physical harm at the same time, where you can get stress, burnout, and that can take a really long time. And I'm sure for anyone who has experienced burnout before, I know that I have in the past, it does take a really long time to recover from that. So we're trying to avoid all of those things. Now, how we actually do that is we look at the risk management process, which I bet everyone on this call has probably seen before. And if you haven't, that's absolutely okay. I'm introducing you to it right now. But this is essentially how we manage those hazards within the workplace and what the process that we take to reduce those risks so we don't end up with someone with burnout within the workplace. So let's start at the very beginning. Number one, you first identify the hazards. So identifying the hazards means that you're looking at, what are the potential impacts of your employee, your context for either your employee or your work organisation. So it might be different for different roles within your organisation, but let's just focus on one example. And I'll use the classic Christmas casual example because I feel like many of us have done that crazy Christmas casual first-time job rush when they were, 16, 17, 18, where they step into a workplace and they're like, right, I'm here to work. What do I do? So we'll use that as our example to work through this process. But first, we need to identify the hazards. So if you're thinking about a first-time employee coming into your workforce and they're coming in for a busy period over the Christmas period, maybe 3 months of the year, and we know it's going to be really busy, what are the hazards that are going to be there? Well, there might be high job demand, so staff feel overwhelmed because of the volume of customers and the stock. There might be low job control, usually casual positions. There's there is the ability to say those shifts, but there can be lots of shifts. There can be fewer shifts. There can be long shifts. There can be a shift in the morning and a shift in the night, which can cause additional stress, but not feeling like you have that staff input to say, hey, this is when I want to work and this is how I want to work, can be one of them. And then violence and aggression. I actually witnessed this a few times, unfortunately, over the last Christmas period when doing some shopping with my son, where people were getting really frustrated within the supermarkets. There's lots of people at supermarkets. I wasn't doing my Christmas shopping at a supermarket, I can guarantee you that. But, you might be at Myers or something like that, and you see people looking for staff and looking for help, and, staff are busy with other people. So there might be longer waiting lines and things like that. So a response to that can be someone feeling stressed and then getting aggressive towards an employee within your organisation, which is never okay, but it does happen, and I've seen it happen. So just being aware that these are the kind of psychological hazards that it could be within your workplace. The next step is to then go, right, now we've identified what those hazards are, let's actually assess the risk. So that's looking at basically the frequency. So how frequently does this happen? How frequently are customers aggressive? How frequently, do our staff run off their feet? Or maybe how frequently are they not having breaks within their shifts, which can, over time lead to burnout and things like that. We're also looking at the duration, so if someone's working a 10-hour shift, do they have time to decompress before their next shift? We have laws to support that, but thinking about it from this perspective is very helpful. And also, particularly for someone within, the Christmas casual space, they're a younger worker, they probably haven't dealt with somebody who has been aggressive towards them before. So, thinking about what's the risk of someone actually being yelled at and then, leading to psychological injury. And then we can actually start to think, if that's going to happen, how do we actually control that? So you're looking at the likelihood and the consequence. So how likely is it to happen? And what's the consequence of that action if it actually does happen? And then taking it and trying to manage those risks and to control those risks, which is the third step. So the third step is going, right, we understand this space now. We've identified the hazards. We understand what the risks are from those hazards. What can we do to actually support that worker in the workplace? So there's a few things. So work design, you can think about when you're hiring for peak periods, making sure that you're hiring enough staff for those peak periods to avoid burnout. So you're not having everyone work 7 days a week. And those kinds of things. Bringing people on board earlier. So your peak period for the Christmas time might be starting from December. So bringing people on board mid-October, early November, thinking about the timing might be a control risk. So they have time to build up the skills so that when they've got a line in front of them, they feel confident and comfortable to be able to manage that. Thinking about your systems of work. So if we were to touch on that, you might think about a buddy system. So maybe someone who worked as a Christmas casual the year before can, work alongside of someone and mentor and coach them, and making sure that that employee isn't necessarily on their own at any point in time. So they might always have a manager present or a 2IC or that buddy there to support and guide them. If things do go sideways, that they've got that support to back them in as well. And also having your policies in place and then having people understand those policies. So, a zero tolerance policy for customer abuse, but then what's the process from that, and then implementing that. So creating that policy, creating that process, and then training that into your staff so that they understand that if a customer is aggressive, this is actually our process. So that's looking at it from, all right, now we understand how to control the risks. That's great. So you're controlling the risks. And the last one is to review, monitor, and see if what you've actually put in place is actually working. How can you do that? You can do it in lots of different ways. Conversations with your staff at the end of the shift, checking in, how are things going? Your one-to-one meetings with that employee. Looking at, how many incidents were reported. So if you've got those incident reporting processes in place, like we mentioned before, going through that data and saying, hey, hang on a second, how often has this actually happened? And then asking staff, how supported do you feel? So you can do that in a lot of different ways. I know within a HR partner, we have anonymous surveys that you can send out to employees, so they can actually give you that data, and you kind of strip away the fear of having your name to something, which can be really helpful with opening that employee to sharing more information. But just looking at different ways that you can actually get that data, and then reviewing those controls. And it's a continuous process to review those controls. But consulting with your employees should happen throughout that entire process. So throughout the identify, assess, control, controlling the risk and reviewing, you should be consulting with them as you're implementing those processes and checking in, hey, how's this going? How's this working? What are we feeling? Is there anything we can change and adjust? And of course, if you've got a health and safety representative, bring them on board. They're the voice for your people within your workplace. So a health and safety representative can do absolute wonders for you in the workplace in terms of helping you implement this as well. So remember that consultation is mandatory, so it must be done, but also it needs to be recorded as well. So think about how you might record that information. So if you're having one-to-one meetings, I've seen a lot of our customers in HR Partner record meetings in internal notes, which record grievances within our modules as well. So think about a place where you can actually come and store that information. And so you can pull reports of that information at any point in time to think, hey, how are we actually going here? Is a great way of doing that. And then if you ever need to show evidence of that, you've got it all there and available to show the workplace inspector or whoever may be involved in that process. Say, yep, we've done it, we've consulted, and here is our evidence to support that. Great. You're already likely doing this, is what I wanted to kind of cover here. It's just about embedding psychological hazards within this framework. Great. So how do we actually do that? I've got a few tips for you here. So step one, get familiar with the code of practice. So the code of practice, I've got a link in our resources, but there's the national code of practice, and then there's of course the state and territory regulations. So do please check that out. There is a wealth of resource and information. And if you have employees across different jurisdictions, like I mentioned before, you might have an employee in Victoria, WA, Queensland, get across what those are. But they're all, like, some of the resources in different platforms can be really helpful too. I found the Work Safe Victoria website, really helpful, really easy to digest. So if you're in Queensland, you can also check that out, but just know that there are different regulations that you may need to follow based on your jurisdiction when you're doing that. So get familiar with that code of practice, very helpful. Step 2, treat psychological injuries like you would physical injuries, like you would deal with a stubbed toe. You want to deal with the stresses that are happening with employees. So you can essentially do that by embedding it into your current framework, and don't feel like you have to do this alone. I imagine a lot of you have OH&S committees, so occupational health and safety committees, health and safety representatives, different managers, business owners within your organisation. So stop and think, who should be involved in this process, and how can we basically ensure that it's a full team approach and it's not just one person who feels like they're barking orders down the line. Make it a collaborative approach, because it is, by definition in law, everybody's responsibility. So think about who needs to be involved, help them along. You've been to this webinar, explain the process, explain what you've learned from reading that documentation and share that with them. And that would be a great way to get people on board and kind of, reduce that fear. It's something we need to do, but something we can do really well, and we're going to have great benefits from doing this. Get commitment engagement from senior leaders and their managers. And as I mentioned before, record all of the work that you do in case you need it from a compliance standard as well. Great. So that's step number 2. Step number 3, of course, is to utilize the data that you already have. So unknowing to you, you might know this, you might not realize this. You've already probably got a lot of the data there sitting there ready to just be reviewed and looked through. So I know for a lot of our HR partner clients, we have reports on a lot of this data. So it could be as simple as running a report and reviewing that data. But you can look at things like absenteeism, turnover, any of the surveys that you've sent out. What are some key trends that have come from there? And is that linking to any of our data that we're seeing in, exit interviews, perhaps? So you can also look at incident reporting, near misses data, any grievances that you've had. But it's likely that within your organization, you're already collecting this data. Just stop and think for a second, where can I find this data and what will be the most valuable in helping us make decisions? So yes, reporting for those HR partner customers is a great way to do that. But yeah, combine those multiple data types. That's going to be really valuable, and also look for those correlations. And then step number 4, which we've already touched on already, is consulting with your team. So sending a pulse survey or an anonymous survey can be really valuable. And think about, do you have a way to do anonymous feedback within your systems of work currently? Meeting with individuals, having connections and chats with individuals and teams and managers is a really great way to discuss these hazards within the workplace and get a sense of exactly what is happening, because you might find that you've got your ideas of what the hazards are, but you'll get more data and information from your employees who are frontline, who are have further insights into what actually might be happening. So you can use that knowledge to strengthen your process. Think about your performance appraisal process. If you don't have one, maybe think about embedding it into your performance appraisal process and say, hey, what are the challenges that you might be having within the workplace right now? And you can start to kind of ask a few questions around that, the psychological safety piece, to ensure that you are essentially getting that data and supporting employees, and then documenting that. So I've seen some of our customers within HR Partner do that really well through the performance management process and documenting that feedback from employees. So that's a great way to do it. One-to-one meetings, and also documenting notes. So if you're having conversations with employees, writing that down as well, so you've got that information. But the key thing is that you're stopping and you're communicating with your employees. That is key. So it doesn't require perfection, this process. So perfect is the enemy of good. So the idea is that you just get started and you get the ball rolling and you start working through this. And then the deeper you go into it, the more you'll learn, the more information you'll have to make better and more informed decisions. And then you just continuously close that loop again and again. So it's a constant review process, similar to when you're dealing with your other injuries, your physical injuries within the workplace. So as promised, I've got a slide here on resources. We will share the resources and this recording with you after this webinar. So we'll have that through to you at some point in time. But you've got the links to the statutory guidance and those codes of conduct, I should say. I know that we do have some international clients on the call today. So if you are an international client, you've also got the ISO 45003 international standard as well. So there is access to that, but you can also check out the Australian standard as well. They're pretty good, but also thinking about your local jurisdiction as well. There are practical assessment tools, of course. There's a People at Work survey, which is wonderful to check out and might be a tool that you could utilise in your organisation to survey your employees. And the Work Well toolkit on the Victorian WorkSafe website is quite great, and it gives practical tips and tricks for you as well. And if you ever wanted to take your knowledge a little bit deeper, there's upskilling. So there's micro-learning. You can do micro-learning courses. I know Ari has a really great course at the moment on the psychosocial code of practice there. So there's a lot of support out there and a lot of ways that you can upskill. And we encourage you to do so that you can better support your organisation. So I hope all of that has been very helpful. Now we're going to jump into the Q&A. I can see that that's been turned on here, which is wonderful. So if anyone has any key questions they'd like to ask, unfortunately, I can't give any legal advice, as I've already mentioned, but I would love to answer any questions that you might have. Great. Debbie, have any of those questions come through? All right. Aha, I can see one. Okay, so this is a really good one. So how can I be responsible for a worker's mental health when so much of their stress comes from their personal life, finances, family issues, which can't be controlled? That is a very, very good question. So we're not required to manage the stresses of someone's personal life. That is just impossible to do, and we're not psychologists and therapists. We're not there to do that. But what we can do is we can focus on work-related hazards. So you've got to consider, you don't want to make work become the tipping point for the employee. So I know that today would be a really great example for Victorians and Tasmanians, where we've got teacher strikes. So we probably have a lot of kids at home today. And, you know, there probably had to be quite a bit of reshuffling for employees at home to be with their children based on that. So employees probably had to show some level of flexibility there today, and it is showing that level of flexibility. So it's talking to your employees about what's happening within their personal life to the extent that they want to share, and also being flexible but reasonably practical with the way that you support them as well. So you don't need to solve all of their problems, but you can support them in the workplace. And I have one example of that where I had an employee come to me one day and say, listen, I've had something quite devastating happen this morning. We were running training that day. He said, I don't want to talk about it at this point in time. It's too fresh. However, I do want to be here. And my question to him was, well, how can I support you? What do you need from me today to get the best out of today? And if you need to at any point of today, do know that you can opt out. So you can, you know, whatever that looks like for you, you can opt out at any point in time. So it was me supporting that employee. I didn't need to resolve their problems, but I just needed to support and guide them based on what they needed that day. So hopefully that example is helpful. But yeah, we're not there to solve the problems for our employees. We're just there to make work not the stress point for them and manage those hazards. Great. All righty. I can't see any more questions coming through, so I might just switch across. If you are a HR partner subscriber currently, and one of the companies that we work with, if you do want to look at any ways that you can embed any of this information into HR Partner as a HR system, we're here to guide and support you with that. And please book a training call in with one of us, because we'd love for you to utilize the system to help manage some of this information and essentially get the most out of HR Partner. And if you're not a client of HR Partner currently and you want to learn more about how you can embed this into a system like HR Partner, please book a demo with us. We'd love to connect and chat and talk about some of the issues that your business is facing. I met with a client a few weeks ago that had basically just come out of a meeting and consultation with their employees and talk about how they could do work better. And they had the system, they had HR Partner, and they said, right, how can we get more out of it? So it can also be a conversation like that. How can you get the best out of a system like HR Partner? So we're here for it. But overall, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on this very hot topic, an important topic for all workplaces in Australia. I hope you've gotten something out of it, but take what you can from this. Remember, perfect isn't what we're striving for. We're just striving to do work better. So take that first step. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful to have you with me, and we'll be in touch with further resources soon. All the best.